Hi there, and welcome to Out There, a Cryptid podcast. I'm Josh, and today we're diving into something thousands of people have reported seeing. Some have seen it during sleep paralysis, others have seen it as it watches them from their periphery, and some have even seen it while wide awake. No one can agree on the purpose of this entity, but everyone agrees that its appearance never changes. A humanoid shadow figure that always wears a wide-brimmed hat. Many have taken to calling the entity the Hat Man. Let's dive in. So why are we talking about the Hat Man again? Because honestly, this entity is too influential, too important to the paranormal world not to get its own episode. We touched on it briefly in the Shadow People episode, and yeah, you might hear a little overlap here and there, but the Hat Man has carved out his own terrifying little corner of this phenomena, and I think he deserves a closer look. We also tried not to make this just a Reddit deep dive, though trust me, there are plenty of stories out there that could fill an entire Reddit Stories episode. And maybe we'll do that just in the future. But for now, let's get into who or what this thing might actually be. We'll get into the Hat Man right after this. Imagine you're dreaming peacefully. You're outside playing with a childhood pet. It's fun. You're happy as you get to pet them once again. It's the best dream you've had in a while. The stress of life has been getting to you, and it's been hard to dream recently. So a nice break with a peaceful dream is exactly what you needed. You look over at your childhood pet one more time, but they aren't there. You get a sinking feeling as you fear that they've run away. But as your anxiety heightens, you're ripped from your sleep. You wake in your bed lying on your back. You try to wipe the cold sweat away, but find that your arms weigh a ton. You can't move them. You can't move anything at all, except your eyes. You know what's happening. It's happened before. Sleep paralysis. In a panic, you look around the room, and that's when you see it. A tall shadow man, seemingly draped in a large coat. The top of his silhouette is adorned with a wide-brimmed hat. He doesn't move. He watches you. You stare at each other. You try to keep your eyes open as long as possible, afraid to let him out of your sight. You remember him. You once saw him as a child. You'd convinced yourself that it wasn't real. Now, you're second-guessing yourself. Finally, the burning becomes too much, and you have to blink. It was a mistake. The Shadow Man now stands by your bed looking down at you. You can't figure out its intent. It doesn't feel malicious or benevolent. It just watches as your anxiety grows. Your fear takes over, and you squeeze your eyes shut and hold them until you've calmed down. Eventually, you find yourself able to move again. The encounter leaves you rattled as you force yourself to drift back to sleep. You realize that you'll never be able to shake off your face-to-face encounter with the Hat Man. This event, however fictional, is eerily similar to hundreds of reports about the Hat Man. So, what is the Hat Man? Veteran listeners of the podcast may remember the Hat Man from the Shadow Figures episode. The Hat Man gets its name from the titular hat that the figure always seems to wear. While sightings vary, it most commonly appears as the silhouette of a tall man. It's usually spotted wearing some type of trench coat or overcoat. And of course, atop its head, it is said to don a fedora or wide-brimmed hat. As for when the entity appears, no one can quite agree. It seems most common for the Hat Man to appear to those who suffer from sleep paralysis. Though this isn't always the only way he's seen. Many, including a friend of TJ's, has seen him while going about their normal day. Some can just make him out from the corner of their eye, while others will see him walk into another room and disappear. Others, like TJ's friend, have seen him just before or after a possible tragedy. TJ has told this story on the podcast before, but I'm going to tell it again here from his friend's perspective. I just finished a super late shift. I was totally drained from it, but still had to drive home. It wasn't a super long drive, but I was tired, so my eyes began to close. Of course, on my way home, I closed my eyes. I don't know if it was the rumble strip or I felt my car bear off the road, but something made me open my eyes. I was about to run right into a sign, going I don't know how fast when I opened my eyes. I managed to swerve back onto the road. Hopped up on adrenaline, I looked in my rearview mirror to look at the sign I nearly hit. And standing next to it was the Hat Man, coat and everything. When I blinked, he was gone. Reports of figures similar to the Hat Man have been around for centuries. However, the popularity and widespread recognition of the Hat Man can be attributed to the use of the internet, specifically the Hat Man Project. Started in 2008 by Tim Brown, the Hat Man Project is a website where people from around the world can upload their experiences with the Hat Man. Tim had his first experience in 1994, which I recounted in the Shadow Figures episode. After hearing a similar account to his own on a radio show, Tim decided it was time to create a platform for Hat Man witnesses to come together. Since the website's launch, hundreds of people have recounted their stories. Now, since Hat Man is a fairly new phenomenon, there's not a lot we can definitively say about them. No one is sure if the Hat Man is malicious or benevolent. Witness reports are mixed, with some stating that the entity is an omen of death, whereas others view the Hat Man as a guardian angel. Its origins are unknown, with nobody knowing where the first report came from. The only details we know are those from the stories that have been told about the Hat Man. And trust me, there's a lot of stories. To start, I'll retell Tim Brown's initial experience for those who haven't listened to our Shadow Figures episode. My experience with the Hat Man came in 1994, when I was about 14 years old. I was living with my grandmother and great-grandmother at the time at my home in Nashville, Tennessee. I had been staying up really late that night, and at about 2 a.m. in the morning, I found myself lying in bed and nodding off as I was watching TV. The lights were all off, and the only light that was lighting my room was coming from the TV set in front of me. From where I was lying in my bed, looking down toward my feet, I had a clear view all the way into and through my great-grandmother's room, which was just parallel to mine, as there was no door between my room and hers. I could also see into the hallway just on the far side of her room. Just inside the hallway was the doorway going into my grandmother's room. As I was lying there, with the covers pulled up to my face, nodding off, my eyes would open and fall, over and over again. And then at some point, something I heard on TV made a noise and caused me to wake up and open my eyes a little wider. Only this time, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I had always had a fear about intruders and what I would do if someone ever broke into our home. For a brief moment, I thought that the movement I was seeing might be my grandmother getting up to go to the bathroom. But as I moved my eyes more into focus, looking down through my great-grandmother's room into the hallway, I very quickly realized that it wasn't my grandmother. What I saw gripped me immediately with fear and dread. I saw a tall, human-like figure, and the figure looked like that of a man. The man had no distinguishable features whatsoever. I could see no eyes, no nose or mouth, only blackness. He looked like a shadow, only darker, much darker. He had a very wide-brimmed hat and a long trench coat that flowed as he moved. I started to tremble. My heart began to race. At that moment, I came to the conviction that there was indeed an intruder in my house. As I watched him move, in the back of my mind, I began to play out scenarios as to what he and I were going to do. Was I going to yell? Was I going to get up and run after him and try to fight him? I looked into the hallway. He stood there at the threshold between my great-grandmother's room and my grandmother's room. He leaned his head and body into my great-grandmother's room and looked in, turning his head toward her and then toward me. I had my eyes closed as much as I could so I could still see him and yet still look like I was sleeping. He stood there for what seemed like an eternity, just staring. He then moved very slowly and without a sound back into the hallway, just out of view. As I kept watching, I then saw this blacker than black figure move toward my grandmother's room. Just like before, he leaned his body and head in her doorway, looking at her, again, not making a sound. He then leaned back and moved out of view into the hallway. At this point, I didn't know what else to do. I was convinced that we had some kind of burglar in the house, so I summed up as much courage as I could, jumped out of bed yelling, and charged into the hallway, ready for a fight. I turned the hallway, and he was gone. Obviously, my yelling and screaming startled and woke up my grandmother and great-grandmother. I told them what had happened, and needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep for a very long time. After my experience that night and during the next day, I spent a lot of time talking with my family about what had happened. I was surprised to know that my experience of the man with the hat and cape was not the only one that had happened in that house. As it turned out, both my grandmother and great-grandmother had seen the same thing. My grandmother relayed to me that a few nights prior she had woken up in the middle of the night and saw a dark figure walk past her doorway in the dim light of the hallway. Since it looked like it was wearing some kind of flowing robe, she thought it was her mother, my great-grandmother, getting up to go to the bathroom, wearing her evening robe. Then too, my great-grandmother told me that she also, on a separate occasion, had seen the same dark shadowing, being lurking in the house at night. I honestly didn't know what to make of it all. And over the years, as time passed, I had grown very antagonistic against the whole thing, brushing it off as a mere happenstance, a figment of my imagination, or perhaps the result of my nodding off and being in that in-between place of being half awake and half asleep. I thought about it every now and then, but relegated it back to part of my mind, paying little attention to it. I would continue to feel this way about the experience until the year 2001. That's when everything changed. I was driving long distance one night and hitting the scan button to see if I could find something to listen to on the radio to help pass the time. The station landed on 1510 WLAC on a show called Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. It was probably 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning when the show came on. They were doing a show on what was called shadow beings. It was the first time that I had ever heard of something like that. As I listened to the show, nothing could prepare me for what I heard next. George Norrie and the guest went on to describe people's experiences with one particular shadow being. A dark, man-like figure with a large, wide-brimmed hat and a cape. Immediately, I felt chills run down my spine. I knew at that moment that what had happened to me as a teenager was not a figment of my imagination, and I was definitely not the result of me nodding off. I had seen what these people were describing. Exactly. Tim Brown realized what many hadn't yet. Multiple people had experienced the same figure. The Hat Man isn't the first of these phenomena. Have you heard of this man? No, literally, this man. It's a drawn image of a man's face that blew up on the internet in the 2010s. The man is balding with elongated lips and bushy eyebrows. If you haven't seen the image before, I encourage you to look it up and see if you recognize this man. Similar to the Hat Man, this man has apparently been seen by thousands of people. This man appears in people's dreams, usually as a full person. He could fill any role, being your father, a friend, a stranger, or someone who just stands in the background. But why are so many people seeing the same person in their dreams? The answer is simple. They're not. In 2008, an Italian sociologist named Andrea Natella created a website called Ever Dream This Man? It showed and described this man and stated that he had been seen in people's dreams since 2006. However, this was never true. Andrea came out in 2010 and announced that the entire thing was a hoax. He said that it was a publicity stunt and part of a guerrilla marketing campaign. So now we have to ask the question, is the Hat Man a hoax? But before we tackle that question, we need to hear about the Hat Man, and what better way to do that with some stories from those who have seen him. More on the Hat Man right after this. This first story comes from the Hat Man Project and is titled, I Didn't Know He Had a Name. Last night, my night terror once again scared the shit out of me. Since childhood, I have experienced this man and always tried to explain that I believe someone is following me without me looking crazy. This Hat Man has stuck with me because in 2010, a black entity, I called him the Black Man, appeared in my mind or vision and told me to slit my husband's throat. At that time, I was going through many family issues and my father just got caught having an affair. The following day I had a nervous breakdown and went into a catatonic state, and my husband had no choice but to commit me to a mental ward to receive care. I am 42 years old and have seen this Hat Man and Black Shadow people who come and go for a long time. When they do come, they cause me fear. The Hat Man is stuck in my right brain because for some reason he must have affected me and my life. I have dealt with these beings for so long, and I have not thought to Google this because I always brushed it off, thinking it as sleep paralysis, since this is the answer I got from my doctors. I tried to explain to people and my husband without sounding crazy, but they did not seem to understand. After last night, I decided to see if Google could give me answers, and came across your website. When the Black Shadow Man or Hat Man visits me, they put more fear in me and in my sleep or visions. I try to reach for help, but I'm immobilized. I do not understand the specifics of my life. They come to me and never to my husband. For one, I already had a breakdown and battled with recovering from the aftermath of a psychosis and getting my mental health under control for many years. You can say this, Hat Man has much to do with the beginning of my breakdown. Now my life is beginning to flourish, but once in a while they visit, and I don't know who they are, what they want, and why they often hurt me or cause fear in me in my sleep. The Hat Man or Black Shadow visits are surreal and put enough fear in me to stick with me till the next day or days. I am glad I am not the only one because, to be honest, they often hurt me, and I don't even know why. Those who have seen the Hat Man often claim to have seen him multiple times. It's also very common for those who saw the Hat Man in their childhood to see him again as an adult. Once more, nobody knows why, but it begs the question, does the Hat Man choose who he watches? Or does he decide to watch them throughout their life? This next story is from Reddit user Cocoas Beauty. Experiencing sleep paralysis since childhood, my episodes have often involved seeing bizarre figures, sometimes even resembling extraterrestrials. While I had countless accounts of the Shadow Man or Hat Man, I initially dismissed them as a popular trend among sleep paralysis sufferers. That skepticism vanished one night when I fell asleep alone in the dimly lit living room recliner, my feet dangling off the side. Despite knowing that sleeping on my back usually triggers sleep paralysis, I drifted off in that position. My youngest children were in their rooms, either asleep or watching television, and my husband and eldest daughter were out at the store. Suddenly, I woke to the familiar paralysis. Usually I can manage these episodes by controlling my breathing and relaxing. However, this time my breathing was shallow and labored, causing immediate panic. Then, in my peripheral vision to the left, I saw him. It was a stark silhouette of a very tall, slender man, perhaps 6'6", wearing a brimmed hat and a long trench coat. His face was completely obscured by darkness. As he moved towards me, my heart pounded with fear, and my breathing grew even more difficult. He then bent over me and seemed to blow air into my mouth and lungs. Immediately after this, I inhaled deeply and sat up, just as my husband and daughter walked through the door. My husband noticed my distress, and when I recounted what had happened, he was stunned. The most unsettling aspect of this episode was the distant sound of rushing air as he blew into my mouth, like someone blowing across the opening of a glass or large soda bottle, creating a tonal sound. My fear shifted into curiosity about why this being helped me breathe when I was struggling. This was my only encounter with the Hat Man, and it was a jarring experience, especially after years of hearing about him and mistakenly believing those who claimed to see him were trivializing the reality of sleep paralysis. There are two things to note from this user's story. The first is the size of the Hat Man. This user describes them as being around 6.5 feet tall. Descriptions of the Hat Man's height range from 6 feet to upwards of 8 feet tall, so this does match what we know of the entity. The other is her belief that the Hat Man was helping her. More often than not, a story about the Hat Man will portray him as an evil entity, or one that seeks to strike fear. This user, however, tells us that the Hat Man helped them breathe, showing the benevolent side of this being. Our third story takes us back to the Hat Man project, with a story titled Hat Man at the Sleepover. This incident occurred in December of 2017 when I was a 13-year-old. I'm currently 19. My friends and I had planned a sleepover to celebrate our friend E's birthday at her house. During the sleepover, I shared a bed with my friend A, while E shared a bed with another girl named S. As we were winding down in the dark room, with the door slightly cracked letting in some light, we positioned our beds facing the door. This allowed the light from the cracked door to serve as a makeshift nightlight for us, as we were not accustomed to complete darkness. We giggled and chatted, caught up in the typical drama of 7th grade, before settling in for sleep. We were under the covers with our heads sticking out, engaging in the pre-sleep conversations that often happen during sleepovers. I can't recall what I was doing at the moment when I suddenly saw a flash. It was similar to the effect of someone taking a flash photograph in the dark, momentarily blinding me. In that flash, I perceived a figure bent over our bed, approximately 7 feet tall, wearing a hat. While most people describe the figure wearing a different hat, to me, it appeared to be a bowler hat. The horror I felt was indescribable. I wasn't able to physically move or scream to wake anyone up. I tried to remain calm, but I couldn't understand who this was or how they got into the house where my friends and I were helplessly sleeping. The sighting happened so quickly that it was difficult to discern the exact details of the figure, other than the fact that it was a large black mass wearing some form of a hat. Despite witnessing this, I chose not to mention what I had seen, as I did not want to frighten my friends or give the impression that I was playing a prank on them. The atmosphere gradually calmed down, and we eventually went to sleep. It was a few months later, while sitting together at the lunch table, that I decided to bring up my experience of seeing a ghost at E's sleepover. However, before I could elaborate, my friend A interrupted me and confessed that she had also seen a ghost during that night. Intrigued, I quickly sketched out the figure and asked her to describe what she had witnessed. Much to my surprise, her description matched mine. She had seen a tall man wearing a hat. While I couldn't explain how both of us had seen the same thing, I had no reason to doubt A's sincerity. It's possible that she was playing a joke on me, but I firmly believe that I genuinely witnessed this figure on 3 separate occasions. Out of those occurrences, the one during E's sleepover remains the most vivid in my memory. A very common discrepancy among eyewitnesses' statements is exactly what type of hat the Hat Man wears. In this story, it's described as a bowler hat, which is common for these sightings. However, it's also common for witnesses to describe a fedora or top hat or a flat, wide-brimmed hat, all of which are different from each other. It makes you wonder if details become foggy in the darkness, or if there's more than one. The Hat Man's creepy silhouette has shown up all over pop culture as well, sometimes clearly inspired by the real stories and other times just close enough to make your skin crawl. Ghost Whisperer had a reoccurring evil entity dressed in all black with a wide-brimmed hat, basically a direct nod to the Hat Man. And in The Haunting of Hill House, there are shadowy figures and a sleep paralysis scene that feels eerily similar, even if they're not all calling him by his name. Evil on CBS dives into demonic sleep entities and shadow figures that definitely tap into the same archetype. And then there's the Babadook, which is probably the most famous cinematic Hat Man. Top hat, trench coat shows up when you're grieving and vulnerable? Yeah, that's him. You've also got Shadow People and Mara, 2 horror films that all go in on the sleep paralysis angle. And in video games, there's actually a game called The Hat Man Shadow Ward, where you have to survive being stalked by him in an abandoned asylum. So whether it's on screen or in your headphones or glitching through your TV in a video game, the Hat Man keeps popping up. And if that many creators are tapping into the same figure, you gotta wonder, where is he really coming from? As many of you know, my sisters and I have had experiences with the Hat Man. I know I have shared them before, but for our new listeners, here is exactly what we had experienced. Let's start with my sister Alyssa's story. We moved into the house when I was 6, and immediately we started hearing your typical haunted house sounds, like footsteps, people talking when you were home alone, doors closing, and even toilets flushing. After a couple of years of having to listen to my siblings and I say that we were scared, my mother decided to look into the history of the house. The only thing she could find was a woman that passed away in the home from cancer. My mother believed what we were hearing was just her moving around the house and living her everyday life on the other side. I believed her, calmed by this fact, until I saw him for the first time when I was 17. That night, my sister, who was 22 at the time, was visiting with her new puppy. Because the family was allergic, my parents asked her and the dog to sleep in the room that was an extension on the house, because it has its own air system. Freaked out about sleeping in this room alone in a haunted house, I agreed to sleep down there with her for the weekend. It was about 3:30 a.m., I know, the worst time, when I woke up having to pee like a crazy woman. I got out of bed and began walking to the bathroom. As I exited the room we were sleeping in, I saw this large shadow man. The outline looked as if he was wearing a long coat and a hat. I immediately was struck with this debilitating sense of dread and ran back into the room with my sister. I woke up scared shitless and still having to pee a couple of hours later. After I saw him, the energy of the house shifted, and everyone began feeling it. My siblings and I would feel scared in rooms that were totally fine to be in before. The footsteps began walking towards you if you were sitting on the couch, even starting from upstairs, going down the stairs and stopping in front of you when you were home alone. And we began using the buddy system at night to travel around the house. I then went off to college and did not spend as much time in the house other than the occasional weekend, holidays, and summer months. The summer between my junior and senior year of college, I was now 21. I spent a lot of time over at my then boyfriend's, now husband's house. I would often be there late and come home at some ungodly hour that I cannot fathom, being a 95-year-old woman who is in bed by 9. One night, I accidentally fell asleep at my boyfriend's house. Having awoken at 2 a.m. in a panic that my dad is going to be pissed because I still had a curfew if I was living under his roof, and it as sure as hell was not 3 a.m. I rushed, grabbing my stuff, and headed home without even saying goodbye. Oops, well, he still married me, so. When I walked into the house, I immediately felt terrified. I began running to the steps, trying to get to my room as fast as I could, for the false sense of safety the comforter of your bed provides. When I turned the corner to go up the stairs, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man sitting on the couch, reading a book with the light on. At first, I thought it was my dad, and turned back to ask why he was up so late, or receive my punishment on the spot because I was busted. But then, I looked back. In that second's time, the light was off, and there was no one there. I've played what I saw over and over again in my head, and remember that the man's shirt was the same material as the couch behind him. He was transparent, but clear enough that I thought it was real out of the corner of my eye. I ran upstairs and called my boyfriend crying. Being the skeptic that he is, he told me it was nothing, and I spent the rest of the night listening to hard, loud footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door all night. Jump forward to when I was 26, when my husband deployed for the first time. I planned a trip with my 9-month-old daughter and large dog back to this house to spend time with family. On the 20-hour drive up, I began questioning if it was a good idea to bring my daughter to this house, after everything I've experienced. But I pushed those thoughts aside at that thought of spending a month with family as opposed to being isolated in Florida. It was the second week into my visit. My father, daughter, and dog and I were the only ones home. The baby was down for a nap upstairs in my old bedroom, and the dog was outside sleeping in the sun, so I took advantage of the time to get some laundry done. Let me preface this by saying that my dad's favorite place in the entire house is outside on the back deck. He drinks an entire bottle of wine, my hero, and reads on his iPad all day until my mom yells for him to come inside. In order to get to the back deck, there is this skinny hallway which has a door leading into the laundry room. While I was doing laundry, I hear footsteps and saw my dad walk through the hallway as if he was going outside to the back deck. I heard the footsteps, saw a clear figure, and heard the door open and close. Not 30 seconds later, I heard my dad call down from the top of the steps that he was going into his bedroom to take a nap. That feeling of dread shot through my body again. I ran out of the laundry room and looked at the back deck. It was empty. I then ran upstairs and interrogated my father. He said he had been upstairs for the past half an hour and called me crazy and told me to calm down. I know what I saw. A clear figure of a man walked by me. Not transparent, not a shadow. A clear-as-day figure of a man with details that convinced my brain that it was real enough to be my father. I don't know who this man is. I don't know what he wants other than to scare us. I'm not sure what is going to happen moving forward, but I do know that what I saw was very real, and that he is getting stronger and more comfortable showing himself to me. And now for Jenna's story. A couple of years ago, my son, who is 5 now, broke his leg in a scooter accident. It was a year from that day, so I was anxious about him potentially getting hurt again. Although I have thought about what bad things could possibly happen in any given space, as mothers often do, I have never visualized it before. That weekend, we were staying at my mom and dad's house for the weekend, which is and has been haunted since we lived there. While I was putting him to bed, I kept thinking about how he might fall down the stairs when he came looking for us in the middle of the night. After he fell asleep, I walked down the steps to join the rest of my family, when I had a vision of my son laying at the bottom of the steps, motionless. Fearful of the vision and the thought that I was having, when I went back to bed, I blocked the majority of the opening of the top of the steps with a large, tall hamper that stays in the hallway. While I was sleeping that night in a different room, I heard the sounds of footsteps moving quickly around downstairs. I then heard loud crying. However, the crying was not in the next room, where I put him to bed. It sounded like it was further away. In a panic, I jumped out of bed and headed out of the room to discover that my son was at the bottom of the stairs, standing, facing the living room, crying. This living room has always been a place where my siblings and I felt uncomfortable. We refused to go there at night, and here is my son in the middle of the night crying while staring at the same room in the pitch dark. I quickly ran down and grabbed my son, taking him back to the room with me to sleep. Since he is only 4, I did not want to scare him, but I did bring it up in casual conversation a couple of days later to try to figure out what actually happened. No mom wants to think that a ghost was in contact with their child, so I was hoping he would reveal something that proved it was just his imagination. Sadly, that was not the case. I asked him what caused him to go downstairs that night. He said he woke up and heard voices. Thinking that the family was awake, he went out of his room and into the upstairs hallway to investigate. When he got out there, he said that he heard voices that sounded like grandma words, but they were really quiet and all messed up. Let me pause and say that his grandma was not even in the house that night. She was in New York City visiting my brother. After hearing the voice, he looked up and saw a shadow on the wall. I have never told him about anything with the shadows we have all seen in the house. He brought up the word shadow all by himself, which put chills throughout my body. He then said he went downstairs looking for his grandma and the rest of my family. And when he got down there, he faced the room, and since it was dark, he started crying. When I asked him what he heard coming from that room, he said, "Shake, shake, shake, shake," and then started to move his mouth around and make weird whispering noises that sounded like growling. He also mentioned that he was running in circles around the house, but could not tell me why. But I think those were the footsteps I was hearing before I heard him crying. As a mother, I now have a 4-year-old explaining things that I myself have experienced. I cannot help but to think this ghost is using my son to get to me, which makes me furious. More on the Hat Man right after this. And lastly, my very own story. My childhood home is very haunted and creepy, always was and always will be. Now, if you read my sister's stories, then you would have heard about the man in the house. I only experienced him once, the first and only time I saw him, in that room, the living room. He was just a shadow figure. He was in the corner of the room. As I was turning the corner to go up the staircase, I saw him. He was wearing a long coat and had a brimmed hat on, but his shadow started at the top of the ceiling, and it went all the way down and curved onto the floor. I sprinted up the stairs and locked myself in the room that night. The other time, I didn't see him, but when I was a kid, I was playing with my toys in the back room. All of a sudden, the light bulb from the fan above me fell and shattered all over me. Now, this isn't abnormal because things like this happen. The thing about this one was that I was not sitting under the light. So for this light bulb to burst over me, it must have made a diagonal pattern in the air. Now, personally, I don't think the Hat Man is just some random sleep paralysis glitch or left over from a bad dream. I think it's something bigger. To me, the Hat Man feels like an entity born from fear itself. It doesn't need a face or claws or gore to terrify you. It's just a simple, shadowy outline with a hat. That minimal shape is exactly what makes it so effective. It's familiar, but just off enough to feel wrong. I think it feeds off fear gaining more power the more people see it, talk about it, or recoil from it. And because its form is so basic, it's easy for any malevolent spirit or energy to slip into that shape and wear it like a mask. That's why so many people across cultures and backgrounds report seeing the exact same thing. Because it's not one single being. It's fear given form. Now that we've heard some stories, what is the Hat Man? Some of the more obscure theories pin the Hat Man as an alien with the ability to alter your memory, causing you to see a shadowy figure. Another is that they're interdimensional beings that can freely hop wherever they'd like. In both cases, the Hat Man takes on an observer role. There's also the idea that there's multiple Hat Men, and they work as a league of watchers peering through the veil. Or simply, the Hat Man is just another shadowy figure whose reasons are beyond our understanding. Alternatively, the Hat Man may not be real. There's a belief that taking Benadryl before falling asleep can increase your chances of seeing the Hat Man. Now, you should not be taking Benadryl just to try and see the Hat Man. This belief lends credence to the theory that the Hat Man is just a mass hallucination. The chances of total strangers hallucinating the same entity are low, but possible. However, once the Hat Man became popular and thousands of people began to hear about it, it increases the likelihood that your brain will hallucinate something more specific. No two people will have the exact same hallucination. This could account for the discrepancies between accounts. Is he bad or good, taller or shorter, an ominous force or a distant watcher? Everyone could experience it differently. Another possible explanation for the Hat Man, and for a lot of other creepy, shadowy stuff we see in the dark, is something called pareidolia. It's basically the brain's habit of trying to find familiar patterns in random information. Like when you see a face in the clouds or a figure in the corner of your room that turns out to be just a coat hanging weird. Our brains want to make sense of what we're seeing, even if there's nothing really there. And in low light, that kicks into overdrive. A shadow cast just right, your eyes adjusting to the dark, your anxiety already up. It doesn't take much for your brain to go, yup, that's a tall man in a hat. It doesn't mean what you saw wasn't terrifying, but it might mean your brain filled in the blanks with the scariest shape it could think of. And for a lot of us, that shape is him. Then there's our final theory, and that is that it's never been real. The question that gets asked a lot is it possible that the Hat Man only shows up because, consciously or not, we've already been told about him? Like, maybe we read about him once, or someone mentioned him offhand, and now he's just lurking in the back of our brains, waiting. So when we're falling asleep, already feeling a little spooked, maybe our minds just reach for the scariest thing they can find. And because that image is already planted, this tall, shadowy figure in a hat, that's what we see. Not because it's real, but because we've made it real to us. Which honestly might be just as scary. I mean, the Hat Man rose to fame alongside this man. Their beginnings are very similar, both being brought to the public's attention through the internet, specifically websites created for spreading awareness. It is entirely possible that the Hat Man started as a publicity stunt that quickly got out of hand. But until Tim Brown or someone else comes out and tells us, we'll never really know. Regardless of its origins, the Hat Man is a dark creature that will withstand the test of time. Whether it's taking up the dark corners of your home or the shadows of your mind, the Hat Man is there, and it is watching and waiting. Okay, this is future Josh talking. As you all know, this episode was delayed about 2-3 days, I think. Well, there was reason for it. So, the first reason is that TJ, who was supposed to record this episode, his mic has been giving him troubles, which is no worries, right? So he sends it over to me. I'm planning on doing it. I have it done. I have it written. When all of a sudden, my microphone stops working. Which, again, may be just a coincidence. So I give it a day, I do some tests, I get it back on. I record again. But this time, I'm about to get to my story that I told you all when my mic just stops working yet again. And it seems like I have to give it a full 24 hours to start working. And let me tell you this, it's not that my microphone is broken or anything like that, because on other applications, it works just fine. On other stories, it works just fine. It's just this story. Now, as I've said before, I've only seen the Hat Man once, but I think that he never tried to mess with me again because I wasn't too afraid of him. And I know you're probably all telling me not to say that out loud, but I am saying I'm not afraid because I don't want him to think that he can bully me. And maybe that's the answer. Just saying, I'm not afraid of you. And believing that. Because you are stronger than any spirit out there. So hopefully this episode comes out and hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you have stories with the Hat Man, please feel free to share them. But until then, so what do you think? Is the Hat Man really out there? Be sure to follow us on Instagram @OutThereCryptids for episode posts, updates, and more. Join our community on Discord, where we dive even deeper into the mysteries we explore here on the podcast. The link can be found on our Instagram. And if you're loving the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. As a patron, you'll get exclusive perks like bonus episodes, early access, and even surprises. See you next week.